The alarms had been ringing for 3 days straight. Commander Vol stood at the observation window of the Coalition command station and watched the distant flashes of light that meant ships were dying. His 6 limbs were rigid with tension, and his compound eyes reflected the orange glow of burning vessels like 1,000 tiny fires. Prime was falling, everyone knew it, no one wanted to say it. The Dominion had arrived with a fleet so massive that the sensor arrays had struggled to count them all. 500 warships against the Coalition's 93. The mathematics of war did not lie, and mathematics said they would all be dead within a week. Turned away from the window as the door behind him opened. Ambassador entered the command center, her blue-green skin pale with exhaustion. She was one of the amphibian people who's now burned beneath the assault. Behind her came Elder, an ancient whose crystalline body hummed with a low frequency that had learned to recognize as grief. "The evacuation ships are loaded," said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "We can save perhaps 30,000 civilians. The rest will have to shelter underground and hope." "Hope for what?" asked a young officer from across the room. His name was, and he was barely old enough to wear the uniform. "A miracle. Perhaps we should pray to the humans while we are at it." Nervous laughter rippled through the command center. Did not laugh. He had heard the human stories all his life, just as every child in the Coalition had. Tales told in the dark to make younglings feel brave. Stories of a species from a death world who had once walked among the stars, who formed bonds with strangers and fought with impossible determination. The humans had supposedly vanished ago, destroyed by some unknown catastrophe, or perhaps just fading into myth like so many other ancient peoples. "The humans are not real," said flatly. "They are stories. We need solutions based in reality." Elder made a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "I would not be so certain, Commander. I have lived for 900 years. In that time, I have learned that legends often grow from seeds of truth. With respect, Elder, we do not have time for philosophy." Pulled up the tactical display, showing the positions of the fleet. "We need to decide which sectors to abandon and which to defend. We need to choose who lives and who dies." Stepped closer to the display, her eyes fixed on the glowing representation of her. "My grandmother told me something once," she said quietly. "She claimed she met a human when she was young, a trader who passed through our system 300 years ago. She said he had soft skin and strange eyes that looked at her like she mattered, like a stranger's survival was worth his concern." "Your grandmother was telling you bedtime stories," said, though his voice had lost its mocking edge. "Perhaps," touched the display, and the image zoomed in on a continent that was now entirely covered in landing zones. But she described things that matched no known species. She said the human had only 2 arms and walked upright on 2 legs. She said he laughed easily and shared his food without being asked. She said he told her that his people had a saying, 'No one gets left behind.'" His crystalline form pulsed with soft light. "The old records speak of such things. The humans were said to come from a world so hostile that simply surviving there required cooperation. Their sun bathed them in radiation. Their gravity crushed their bones. Their atmosphere was filled with a corrosive gas they called oxygen, and yet they thrived. They spread across their system and then beyond, always reaching, always connecting." "And then they disappeared," said. "Yes. The records become confused approximately 8,000 years ago. Some say they were destroyed by an enemy. Some say they destroyed themselves. Some say they simply went silent, retreating from a galaxy that had disappointed them." The command center fell quiet. Outside, another flash lit the darkness as another ship died. A communications officer suddenly straightened at her station. "Commander, we are detecting an unusual signal at the edge of the system." "Move to our station. Reinforcements." "No, sir. The signal does not match any known profile. It appears to be mathematical in nature. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, fundamental constants. Someone is announcing their presence in the most basic language possible. Could it be a trap, the trying to confuse our sensors? The do not use such methods, sir. They prefer to announce themselves with weapons fire. The officer hesitated. Sir, the signal is originating from a region of space that our charts list as empty. No stations, no colonies, no known civilizations. Moved to stand beside her, exhaustion forgotten. What if it is them? What if the stories are true? They are not true, said, but his voice lacked conviction. They cannot be true. If the humans existed, if they had the power the legends describe, why would they have hidden for 8,000 years? Why would they appear now at this moment in this place? Drifted closer, his ancient form casting prismatic shadows across the floor. Perhaps because this is the moment they are needed. Perhaps because someone, somewhere, is finally desperate enough to believe. Stared at the sensor display showing the unknown signal. His mind told him to ignore it. His training told him to focus on the battle at hand. But somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where his people kept their courage, a small flame of something dangerous had begun to burn. It felt like hope. We have no time for mysteries, he said finally. Ignore the signal. Focus all resources on the evacuation and defense. He turned away from the display and walked back to the observation window. Behind him, the mysterious signal continued to pulse. Prime numbers, geometric sequences, a message in the language of mathematics that any intelligent species could understand. We are here, we are coming, hold on. But did not know that. He only knew that his people were dying, and that all the legends in the galaxy could not save them now. Or so he believed. Outside the window, the distant battle continued to rage, and somewhere in the darkness between stars, something ancient was waking up. Captain Laura Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Resolute and watched the tactical display with steady eyes. 12 human ships hung in the darkness at the edge of the system, hidden behind a small moon that blocked them from enemy sensors. For 30 years, she had served in a fleet that no one knew existed. Today, that was about to change. Captain, the coalition forces are down to 61 ships, reported Lieutenant Commander Danny from the tactical station. His voice was calm, but his hands moved restlessly across his console. At current attrition rates, they will be completely destroyed within 48 hours. Laura nodded slowly. She had been watching the battle unfold for 3 days, ever since human long-range sensors had detected the invasion. 3 days of watching strangers die while her fleet waited in the shadows. Any response to our signal? She asked. Ensign Park shook her head from the communications station. Nothing, Captain. Either they did not receive it, or they do not understand it, or they have chosen to ignore it. Or they think it is a trick, Danny added. I would think it was a trick. Who sends prime numbers during a battle? Laura allowed herself a small smile. We do, because mathematics is the only language that needs no translation. She turned to face her crew, seeing the tension in their bodies and the questions in their eyes. I know what you are all thinking. For 8,000 years, humanity has hidden from the galaxy. We have watched from the shadows, rebuilt our civilization, raised our children in safety. And now I am asking you to throw all of that away. The bridge was silent. Every officer present knew the history. 8,000 years ago, humanity had fought a war against an enemy so terrible that its name had been erased from all records. They had won, barely, but the cost had been almost everything. The survivors had retreated to a hidden corner of the galaxy and made a decision. Never again would they involve themselves in the affairs of others. Never again would they risk extinction for strangers. But Laura Mitchell had never believed that isolation was truly the human way. I spoke with Admiral Costa this morning, she continued. The decision has been made. We are authorized to intervene. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the bridge. I will not pretend this is not dangerous. They are powerful and we are only 12 ships, but I have read the intelligence reports. They do not simply conquer, they enslave, they destroy. If they take Prime, they will use it as a staging ground to attack a dozen other worlds. Millions will suffer, billions perhaps. And if we reveal ourselves, every power in the galaxy will know that humanity still exists, Danny said. It was not an objection, merely a statement of fact. We will never be able to hide again. No, Laura agreed. We will not, but I have been thinking about that, Danny, thinking about what it means to be human. We come from a world that tried to kill us every day of our existence. Earthquakes, storms, predators, diseases. And do you know what saved us? Not strength, not intelligence, not technology. What saved us was each other. We survived because we cooperated. We thrived because we cared about strangers. That is who we are. That is who we have always been. She gestured toward the tactical display, toward the distant lights of dying ships. Those people out there are strangers, but our ancestors would have helped them anyway, and I think we should too. Park spoke up from her station. Captain, I joined the fleet because my grandmother used to tell me stories about Earth, about how humans would cross oceans to help people they had never met, about how we built hospitals and schools in places we would never visit. She said that was what made us special. The young ensign's voice was steady. I think she would want us to help. One by one, the other officers nodded their agreement. Laura felt something warm spread through her chest. Pride, perhaps, or maybe just the simple satisfaction of serving with good people. Then let us make our ancestors proud, she said. Helm, plot a course to intercept the fleet. Communications, prepare a broadcast on all coalition frequencies. Tactical, bring all weapons to ready status. The bridge erupted into controlled activity. Laura watched her crew work and thought about the moment that was coming. In a few minutes, humanity would step back onto the galactic stage. Nothing would ever be the same. Course plotted, Captain, the helmsman reported. Message prepared, added. Broadcasting in coalition common tongue. Laura took a deep breath. All ships engage faster than light drive on my mark. 3, 2, 1 mark. The stars stretched into lines of light, and the 12 human ships leaped across space. They emerged from faster-than-light travel directly between the coalition forces and the Armada. Alarms immediately began to sound on every ship in the system as sensors struggled to identify the new arrivals. Broadcast now, Laura ordered. Activated the transmission. Her voice carried across every frequency, reaching every ship, every station, every desperate soul fighting for survival. This is the Earth vessel Resolute. We are human. We are here to help. On the Coalition command station, Commander Vol stared at his display in disbelief. 12 unknown ships had appeared from nowhere, their designs unlike anything in the galactic database. They were sleek and powerful, built for war but somehow elegant. Ambassador clutched his arm, her eyes wide. Did you hear that? Did you hear what they said? Could not speak. His throat had closed around words he had never expected to say. Behind him, Elder's crystalline form blazed with light so bright it hurt to look at. The legends were true, finally whispered. By all the gods of all the worlds, the legends were true. And in the darkness of space, 12 human ships turned to face 500 enemies and held their ground. Warlord of the Dominion looked at the 12 new ships on his display and laughed. His laugh was a harsh sound, like metal scraping against stone, and it echoed through the bridge of his flagship. 12 ships, he said to his officers. 12 tiny ships have come to challenge us. How delightful, destroy them. The fleet turned a portion of its massive firepower toward the human vessels. Plasma cannons charged. Missile bays opened. 100 weapons locked onto targets that should have been easy kills. The first volley streaked across space like a wave of fire. And then something impossible happened. The human ships moved, not in the slow, predictable patterns that I had studied for decades. They moved like water, like wind, like living things that could feel danger before it arrived. The plasma bursts missed by meters. The missiles lost their targets and spiraled into empty space. What is this? A demanded. How are they doing that? No one had an answer. On the bridge of the Resolute, Captain Laura Mitchell gripped her command chair as her ship twisted through the enemy barrage. Danny, status report. All ships intact, Captain. The adaptive shielding is holding, and our evasion algorithms are performing beyond expectations. Danny's fingers flew across his console. Returning fire now. The human ships did not fire in the massive volleys that most species used. Instead, they released precise, targeted strikes at specific points on the vessels. Power conduits, shield generators, weapon systems. Each shot was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum energy expenditure. 3 destroyers went dark within the first minute, their critical systems crippled by surgical strikes. Impossible, I snarled. They are only 12 ships. How can 12 ships do this? The answer was 8,000 years of preparation. 8,000 years of studying galactic warfare from the shadows. 8,000 years of developing technology specifically designed to fight outnumbered. Humanity had learned from their ancient war that they would always be few against many, so they had built a fleet that did not need numbers. They had built a fleet that needed only skill, courage, and the willingness to risk everything. Commander watched the battle from the Coalition command station, his compound eyes unable to look away. The human ships were everywhere at once, appearing where they did not expect them, striking weak points that should have been hidden, protecting Coalition vessels that were too damaged to protect themselves. They fight like nothing I have ever seen, breathed beside him. They take risks that should be suicidal, but they calculate everything perfectly. Not perfectly, corrected gently. Watch the vessel on the left flank, the one called Brave Heart. Shifted his attention to the human destroyer that had indicated. It was positioned between the main line and a Coalition hospital ship that had lost its engines early in the battle. The hospital ship carried 3,000 wounded soldiers and civilians who could not be evacuated in time. They are shielding the hospital ship, realized. But that position is directly in the line of fire. They will be destroyed. Yes, said quietly, they know. On the Braveheart, Lieutenant Commander Cole knew exactly what she was doing. Her ship had taken position in front of the hospital ship 20 minutes ago, and since then she had absorbed 17 direct hits. Her shields were failing. Her hull was breached in 3 places. Her crew was dying around her. Ma'am, her helmsman said, blood running down his face from a cut above his eye. The dreadnought is charging its main cannon. If we take a direct hit from that, we are finished. Looked at the hospital ship behind her. 3,000 lives. 3,000 strangers who had never heard of Earth, who had probably never believed the human legends. 3,000 people who would die if she moved. Hold position, she said. Ma'am, we could still withdraw. The hospital ship might survive long enough for rescue. Might is not good enough. Opened a channel to the Resolute. Captain Mitchell, the brave heart, will hold position. Whatever happens, do not let the hospital ship die. Cole out. The dreadnought fired. The brave heart took the full force of the blast. The ship shuddered, buckled, broke apart. Cole and her crew of 87 humans died in the darkness between stars, far from home, protecting people they had never met. But the hospital ship survived. Across the Coalition fleet, something changed. Officers who had been fighting with desperation began to fight with fury. Crews who had been preparing for death began to believe in victory. They had watched strangers die for them. They had seen the legends come to life and sacrifice everything. All Coalition vessels, Commander broadcast, his voice shaking with emotion he could not contain. The humans have shown us what courage looks like. Now we show them what gratitude looks like. All ships attack. The Coalition fleet surged forward, not in the careful, defensive patterns they had been using, but in an aggressive assault that caught them completely off guard. Human ships and Coalition ships fought side by side, covering each other, protecting each other, dying for each other. On a command cruiser, Gunnery Sergeant Maria Santos led a boarding party through corridors filled with enemy soldiers. Her team was outnumbered 10 to 1, but they moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural. "Left corridor 2 hostiles," her point man called out. "Right corridor 5 more," added her rear guard. Maria made decisions in fractions of seconds, placing her people exactly where they needed to be, never losing anyone to an avoidable mistake. Within an hour, they had captured the cruiser's bridge and seized intelligence data that would prove vital in the days to come. Warlord watched his fleet fragment around him. Ships that had fought together for centuries were falling into disarray, unable to predict human tactics, unable to counter coalition morale. His 500 ships still outnumbered the enemy, but numbers meant nothing against opponents who simply refused to behave rationally. "Why do they do this?" he demanded of no one in particular. "Why do they die for strangers? What do they gain?" No one answered him. No could answer him. They had conquered 100 worlds, but they had never encountered a species that valued others more than themselves. "All ships tactical withdrawal," a finally ordered, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "We will regroup and return with greater force." The fleet began to pull back, leaving behind dozens of wrecked vessels and thousands of dead soldiers. They were not defeated, not truly, but they had lost something far more important than ships. They had lost their certainty. And in the space above Prime, human and coalition vessels floated among the debris, battered and bleeding but alive. 3 human ships had been destroyed. Hundreds of humans had died, but Prime still stood, and the legend of humanity had become undeniably, terrifyingly real. The medical bay of the Resolute was filled with the wounded. Human and coalition soldiers lay side by side on beds that had been designed for only one species, but now accommodated a dozen. The air smelled of blood and antiseptic, and the peculiar chemical scent that produced when they were in pain. Captain Laura Mitchell walked between the beds, stopping to speak with each patient. She had slept for only 2 hours since the battle ended, but she could not rest while her people were suffering. Her people. She realized that the phrase had expanded in her mind to include everyone on the ship, regardless of species. She stopped beside a bed where a young human Marine lay with bandages wrapped around his chest. His name was Ben, and he had taken a piece of shrapnel to the lung during the boarding action. The doctors said he would live, but he would carry the scar forever. "Captain," Ben said, his voice weak but clear, "did we do the right thing?" Laura sat down on the edge of his bed. "What do you mean, Corporal?" "Breaking isolation, revealing ourselves." Ben's eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if he could see through it to the stars beyond. "My grandfather used to say that hiding kept us safe, that the galaxy was too dangerous for humans to trust anyone. He said our ancestors made the right choice when they disappeared." Laura was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Your grandfather was not wrong. Hiding did keep us safe. For 8,000 years we rebuilt, recovered, grew strong again. But I have been thinking about what safety really means. Ben, is it just survival, just keeping your heart beating for another day?" She gestured toward the other beds, where coalition soldiers were being treated by human doctors. "Look at them. Yesterday they were strangers. Today they are comrades. Tomorrow they might be friends. Is that not worth the risk?" Ben turned his head to look. Across the bay, a human nurse was carefully adjusting the breathing apparatus of a soldier. The eyes were closed, but his hand had found the nurse's wrist and was holding it gently, as if afraid she might disappear. "I guess so," Ben said finally. "I guess that is what being human is about." Laura squeezed his shoulder and stood. "Rest now. We need you healthy for whatever comes next." She continued her rounds, eventually making her way to the shuttle bay where the coalition representatives had been brought for a formal meeting. Commander was there, along with Ambassador and Elder. They stood awkwardly among the human shuttles and equipment, clearly uncertain of proper protocol. Captain Mitchell said, performing a complex gesture with his 6 limbs that Laura had been told was a sign of deep respect. "I do not have words sufficient to express what your people have done for us." "No words are necessary," Laura replied. "We did what anyone should do when strangers are in trouble." "That is precisely the point," said, his crystalline form glowing softly. "Not everyone would do what you did. In fact, almost no one would. They would never sacrifice themselves for strangers. Most coalition species would hesitate, calculate, weigh the costs and benefits. But your people did not hesitate. Your people died protecting a hospital ship full of wounded soldiers they had never met." Stepped forward, her blue-green skin flushed with emotion. "Captain, I must ask you something directly. Will humanity join the coalition?" Laura had been expecting this question. She had discussed it with Admiral Costa and the other human commanders during the brief period of rest after the battle. The answer was complicated. "Ambassador, I must be honest with you. Humanity is not what your legends describe. We are not saviors or heroes. We are flawed. We have dark chapters in our history, wars where we killed each other by the millions, atrocities that shame us to remember, periods of greed and cruelty that nearly destroyed us." She paused, meeting eyes directly. "If you expect perfect beings who will solve all your problems, you will be disappointed." Smiled, and it was the first real smile Laura had seen from her since the crisis began. "Captain, the legends never said humans were perfect. They said humans were stubborn. They said humans formed bonds with strangers. They said humans never gave up on people, even when giving up would be easier." She reached out and touched Laura's arm, a gesture of connection that crossed the boundary between species. "We do not need saviors. We need friends. We need people who will stand beside us when things are hard. That is what you have shown us today." Stepped forward and performed another gesture, this one even more elaborate than the first. "Among my people, there is a ritual called the binding of warriors. It is performed when soldiers from different hives prove themselves to be true allies in battle. I would be honored if you would accept this binding, Captain. It would make you warriorkin to the—" Laura felt something shift in her chest. For 8,000 years, humanity had been alone. They had convinced themselves that isolation was strength, that distance was safety. But standing here, surrounded by aliens who had fought beside her, bled beside her, nearly died beside her, she understood that they had been wrong. "I accept," she said, "and I will recommend to my government that we open formal diplomatic relations with the coalition. It is time for humanity to stop hiding." Made a sound like a symphony of bells. "The galaxy has waited 8,000 years for this moment. I am grateful to have lived long enough to see it." On the surface of Prime, human medical teams were already at work. Doctor, a physician who had spent the battle treating wounded soldiers in an underground shelter, watched in amazement as human doctors worked alongside her own staff. "Your blood," she said to a human medic who had just finished a transfusion for a badly injured child. "It is compatible with ours." "Partially," the medic replied. "We have been studying galactic biology for a long time, Doctor. We know which species we can help and which we cannot. Your people are lucky. Our blood types match fairly well." "Lucky?" repeated. "Yes, I suppose we are very lucky indeed." She watched the human move to the next patient, working with calm efficiency despite obvious exhaustion. These beings from legend, these mythical creatures from a death world called Earth, were exactly what the stories had described. Stubborn, compassionate, impossible to stop once they decided to help. Doctor had never believed in legends, but she was beginning to think that perhaps she should start. Above the planet, the human and coalition fleets began the long process of recovery. 3 human ships had been lost: the Braveheart, the Endeavor, the Hope's Light. 263 humans had died defending strangers. Their names were recorded. Their stories would be remembered. And in the quiet moments between tasks, human and alien alike paused to honor those who had given everything so that others might live. Humanity was back, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Prime. The galaxy had changed more in those 6 months than it had in the previous 1,000 years, and nowhere was that change more visible than on the neutral station called Concordance. The Galactic Coalition Assembly was the largest gathering of species in known space. Representatives from 300 worlds sat in a vast circular chamber, their bodies and forms as varied as the stars themselves. Perched beside amphibian, crystalline floated near gaseous, and at the center of it all, walking to the speaker's platform with calm confidence, was Ambassador Chris Taylor of Earth. Chris was a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had spent 40 years as a diplomat among his own people, resolving conflicts and building bridges between communities that had forgotten how to trust each other. Now, he faced the greatest challenge of his career, introducing humanity to a galaxy that had believed them to be myth. "Distinguished representatives," he began, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the chamber. "I stand before you as the first official ambassador from Earth to the Galactic Coalition. I wish I could say that humanity has returned to the stars as perfect beings, ready to share our wisdom with the galaxy. But that would be a lie, and I have learned that lies are poor foundations for friendship." The chamber was silent. 300 species waited to hear what the legendary humans would say. "Our history is not a story of unbroken triumph," Chris continued. "We have committed atrocities. We have waged wars against each other that killed billions. We have destroyed ecosystems, oppressed the weak, and surrendered to greed more times than we can count. There were moments in our past when we nearly wiped ourselves out entirely." He paused, letting those words settle over the assembly. "But we did not wipe ourselves out. We survived. Not because we were the strongest but because even in our darkest moments, there were always some of us who chose compassion over hatred, who chose to help strangers instead of fearing them, who chose to build instead of destroy." Elder rose from his position in the delegation. His crystalline form blazed with inner light as he spoke. "I have studied human history since the day of the battle. I have read your records, examined your artifacts, spoken with your people. And I can tell you that Ambassador Taylor speaks the truth. Humanity is not perfect, but humanity is something perhaps more valuable. Humanity is honest about its flaws and committed to being better." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Coming from an elder, those words carried enormous weight. Chris nodded gratefully too and continued. "6 months ago, 12 human ships arrived at Prime. We did not come because we expected reward or recognition. We came because people were dying and we could not stand by and watch. That is who we are. That is who we have always been, even when we failed to live up to our own ideals." Movement at the edge of the chamber drew everyone's attention. A representative was rising from his seat. The assembly fell completely silent. They had not participated in coalition politics for centuries, preferring conquest to diplomacy. Their presence at all was a shock. The who approached the center platform was familiar to those who had studied the Battle of Prime. Representative, a former warlord, now wore the robes of a peace envoy instead of military armor. "May I speak?" he asked, his harsh voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Chris gestured in welcome. "The floor is open to all." Stood beside the human ambassador, his massive form towering over the smaller being. "6 months ago, I led the invasion of Prime. I commanded 500 warships. I believed that strength was the only truth that mattered and that the strong had the right to take from the weak." He paused, his reptilian eyes sweeping across the assembly. "Then I encountered the humans." The chamber was absolutely still. I watched a single human destroyer position itself in front of a hospital ship. I watched that destroyer absorb punishment that should have destroyed it 10 times over. I watched its crew die, one by one, refusing to move, refusing to abandon strangers they had never met. A's voice grew quieter, almost reflective. I could not understand it. In the way of thinking, such sacrifice is madness. Why die for those who cannot help you? Why suffer for those who give you nothing in return? He turned to face Chris directly. but I have thought about it for 6 months, and I believe I finally understand. You die for strangers because you do not see them as strangers. You see them as people, as beings with the same right to live as yourself. That is weakness, but I have seen what your weakness accomplished. I have seen a galaxy inspired by your example. I have seen species that hated each other for generations begin to talk about peace. I reached into his robes and produced a small crystal which he held out to Chris. The Dominion has authorized me to sue for peace, not surrender, peace. We wish to negotiate an end to hostilities and explore the possibility of joining your coalition. He placed the crystal in Chris's hands. You have shown us that there is another way to be strong. We wish to learn it. The assembly erupted in shocked whispers. The most feared conquerors in the galaxy were asking for peace because of humans. Chris accepted the crystal with solemn dignity. The people of Earth welcome this opportunity. We have learned from bitter experience that former enemies can become the strongest friends. After the formal session ended, Commodore Laura Mitchell found herself surrounded by curious delegates who wanted to meet a human warrior in person. She answered their questions patiently, but her attention kept drifting to a young who stood at the edge of the crowd, too shy to approach. Eventually, Laura excused herself and walked over to the youngster. "Hello there, my name is Laura. What is yours?" The young's compound eyes widened. I am still a student. I should not be bothering important people." "You are not bothering me." Laura crouched down to bring herself closer to his eye level. "Is there something you wanted to ask?" Hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "The stories say that humans form bonds with other species, that you become friends with anyone, no matter how different. Is that true?" Laura smiled. "It is true. Humans have a saying, a stranger is just a friend you have not met yet. Even though we look so different from you." Especially, Laura reached out and gently touched one of smaller limbs. "Different is not bad. Different is interesting. Different means we can learn from each other." His body language shifted into what Laura had learned to recognize as joy. "I want to learn about Earth. I want to visit someday. Is that possible?" "I think that can be arranged." A sound from the main entrance drew their attention. A human school ship had docked at Concordance, and children were beginning to emerge. Human children of various ages, sent as part of a cultural exchange program that had been established almost immediately after the treaty was signed. Watched the human children with fascination. They were so strange, with their soft skin and their 4 limbs and their loud voices. But they were also laughing, playing, reaching out to touch the alien station around them with obvious curiosity and delight. One human child, a girl of perhaps 8 years, spotted and ran over immediately. "Hi, I am Sophie. Your eyes are so cool. Can you really see in all directions at once?" Looked at Laura uncertainly. Laura just smiled and nodded encouragingly. "Yes," said slowly. "I can see everywhere. Can you really not?" "No, we only see in front. It is so weird." Sophie grabbed Slim without hesitation. "Come on, let us go explore. I want to see everything." Allowed himself to be pulled along, his initial shyness completely forgotten. Laura watched them go, human child and child, already chattering away like old friends. Ambassador Chris Taylor appeared at her shoulder. "That is a beautiful sight." "It is," Laura agreed. 8,000 years of isolation, and it only took one battle to remind us who we really are. The legends said we would return someday. I suppose the legends were right. Laura shook her head. "No, the legends were incomplete. We are not just warriors or helpers or saviors. We are all of those things and more. We are human, and now the galaxy knows it." She looked out at the assembly hall, where representatives of 300 species mingled and talked, many of them approaching humans with curiosity and hope. The universe had believed humanity was just a legend, a myth, a story to tell frightened children. Now they knew the truth. Humanity was real, humanity was here, and humanity would never abandon them again.